A month ago, Jeremy Corbyn was suspended from the Labour Party for telling the truth. The decision to suspend him threatened to tear the party apart, but he has now been reinstated. Is the party back from the brink? That's a big question tonight, and we'll go through all the details of what has happened. And I am delighted to be joined for this very special edition of Tisky Sour by Aaron Bastani. Aaron, how are you doing?
I'm great, Michael. I think I'm just, we were talking about this before going on air tonight. I think we're just so happy that we can be part of a project which can respond to these events as our audience wants to, as the left wants to. And I think it's a really critical service right now to interrogate what's happened, the nature of his readmission, and where the left goes from here.
And I mean, it is obviously we did a sort of impromptu show on that day when he was suspended, and it is sort of important to know how different this feels to that one. That was almost like, it was difficult to believe what had just happened. Keir Starmer had basically pressed the nuclear button. He had blown the party apart. He had done something that I think no one would have. You would have been called stupid if during the leadership election you would have said Keir Starmer will get elected and within 6 months he will have found a reason to suspend Jeremy Corbyn. People have said, you're a conspiracy theorist. That's conspiratorial. We were sort of, it took a while for us to absorb that information. Now, for me, this is just a massive relief. Obviously we are going to go through the various steps of what has occurred today, the reactions from various parts of the party. But the main feeling from me is relief because, there were no good options. When Jeremy Corbyn was suspended from the Labour Party, obviously staying in the party felt like it felt awful to have them having sort of humiliated someone who basically rescued the party from obscurity. Obviously, the 2019 election didn't go very well, the 2017 election very well, but he transformed the politics of the party and the politics of Britain. And for him to be humiliated, kicked out of the party in such a way, or suspended from the party in such a way, I think, just felt wrong and gross to so many people. And for him to have been reinstated, I think now we can, finally step back, move on. Aaron, your instant thoughts on all of this, eh?
Yeah, well, look, we obviously want to move on, and we've seen people say, "Oh, now Labour must unify." But I think it's really important that we talk about, the nature by which this happened, the fact that it didn't adhere to any of the processes which the HRC demands Labour adopt with regards to lack of political interference, the fact that it should be an impartial process, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, there are the implications for Keir Starmer as leader, because right now the Labour right thinks he looks stupid. They think he looks weak. He's made the wrong decision. The Labour left thinks he made the wrong decision, and now he's made the right one, albeit under lots of pressure. He's lost lots of goodwill. Look, many, many, many Jeremy Corbyn supporters, people that voted for him twice, voted for Keir Starmer. And they wouldn't have agreed with some of the more skeptical, critical accounts that we've had on this show. We all don't, not all of the Navarra team agree with, all of that either, by the way. But I feel like he's lost a lot of goodwill to those people. And the most sort of skeptical people about Starmer have been very much vindicated. And so it's hard for him. The Tories are going to throw this at him now. The Labour right's going to throw it at him, and the Labour left isn't going to trust him. So one of the most remarkable and stupid and ultimately also needless decisions from him as Labour leader. It could define his leadership. I don't want it to. After Biden won the presidency, I was speaking to my partner. I said, I really want Keir Starmer to be the prime minister, but he's just suspended his predecessor. He's making it really hard. This whole episode has made that job that bit much harder.
But today, I think, has made it easier. Right. So, people were talking about the implications of Joe Biden winning the presidency. And, people are saying, oh, is Cummings being dropped related to the fact that a kind of unifying figure has been elected? Is now Corbyn being reinstated connected to the fact that Biden was actually, even though he didn't adopt the policies of the left flank of the Democratic Party, was, tended to be fairly civil towards them? Is Keir Starmer learning lessons? I think in this particular instance, it's probably less likely that there was an influence from across the Atlantic. I think it seems like there was a desire to roll back from what was a stupid decision. The backlash from Labour Party members has been enormous. They've had to end up suspending officers in CLPs just for talking about this, for voting on the fact that they are outraged that Jeremy Corbyn was suspended, but now he is back in. There is a bit of a chance to step back from this. I said we'll talk you through the events of the day. So partly, this is to do with new statements which have come out from Jeremy Corbyn. So this morning, we learnt this NEC panel was going to happen. So did journalists. And Jeremy Corbyn presumably did as well. I imagine he's known for a little while. But he released a statement on Twitter and Facebook, which he said he had put forward to the party at the time of his suspension. Let's go straight to it. So this is from his Facebook post. So Corbyn writes, "Last month, I was suspended from the Labour Party after 54 years membership and 4.5 years as party leader. On the day I was suspended, I gave a broadcast interview to clarify what I had said in response to the EHRC report, and I also made a statement to the party to clear up any confusion about what I had meant as follows." Then this is the statement that he sent to the party last month. So he writes, "The publication of the EHRC report should have been a moment for the Labour Party to come together in a determination to address the shortcomings of the past and work as one to root out anti-Semitism in our ranks and wider society. We must never tolerate anti-Semitism or belittle concerns about it. And that was not my intention in anything I said this week." Obviously, this is said a month ago. "I regret the pain this issue has caused the Jewish community and would wish to do nothing that would exacerbate or prolong it. To be clear, concerns about anti-Semitism are neither exaggerated nor overstated. The point I wish to make was that the vast majority of Labour Party members were and remain committed anti-racists, deeply opposed to anti-Semitism." It goes on, "I fully support Keir Starmer's decision to accept all the EHRC recommendations in full and, in accordance with my own lifelong convictions, will do what I can to help the party move on, united against anti-Semitism, which has been responsible for so many of history's greatest crimes against humanity." Now, this is, oh, no, we've got a bit more. So that was the end of the previous statement that he made a month ago. And now we've got back to his statement from today. So following that, "I'm grateful to the many thousands of Labour Party members, trade unionists and supporters in Britain and around the world who have offered their solidarity. I hope this matter is resolved as quickly as possible so that the party can work together to root out anti-Semitism and unite to oppose and defeat this deeply damaging Conservative Party." So that was the statement he made this morning, which appears to have been sufficient for that suspension to be lifted. The sort of discussions that were going on about this online today was whether or not this was a climb down. Was this Jeremy Corbyn retracting what he had said, or was it him clarifying what he had said? Now, I think it's a little bit of both, to be honest. He to me, doesn't seem to have retracted any of the claims he made about anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. So to go over what he said last time around, and this is just the controversial part of his original statement, which he made public on the day the EHRC report was released. So he then wrote, "One anti-Semite is too many, but the scale of the problem was also dramatically overstated for political reasons by our opponents inside and outside the party, as well as much of the media. That combination hurt Jewish people and must never be repeated." So what's changed now is then he was saying the extent of the problem was dramatically overstated for political reasons, which, I mean, I agree with. What he has said now is he didn't want to say the concern was exaggerated or overstated. And to me, that seems very reasonable. I mean, if you look at polling of the Jewish community in this country, there was genuine concern. I don't think people were faking that. There was genuine concern about the scale of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. I think we're going to have to move forward disagreeing as to how that was allowed to happen. So there will be people who argue that the reason people were so scared is because of the extent of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. I'd probably suggest that the reason people were so scared was because, well, in part, there was some anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, but it did, in my view, get blown out of proportion by the media, who often behaved in a very opportunistic way, let's say. But what I'm hoping, I don't even actually want to relitigate this, because I think what can happen at the moment is we can all agree, or I can at least, on what Jeremy Corbyn has said this time around, which is the concern about anti-Semitism was not exaggerated. It was very real. And we should take that very seriously, because if people were concerned and scared about anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, that's obviously completely tragic. And polls did show that many people in the Jewish community were, and we shouldn't belittle that. But obviously, as I say, myself and many other people in the Labour Party are going to have strong disagreements about the sequence of events that led to that sad reality. And I think that what we have here is now a statement which we can basically all agree on and move forward now. Just to finish I'm going to go to you, Aaron. What do you make of that? What did you make of Jeremy Corbyn's statement today, saying sort of, the concern about anti-Semitism is not exaggerated and it's not overstated?
I think it's important to say there are two things here. So if we can get the first bit up, the initial point about exaggeration, he was saying it was exaggerated in the media, and now he's saying that the extent of it isn't exaggerated. I mean, the exact words, people can read for themselves. So it's open to interpretation whether or not you think he substantively changed anything. I don't think he did. He said this time he thought all the recommendations of the report should be implemented. He said that the first time round, of course, he said that in the sentence following, I disagree with some of the findings, right? And the HSC report was not purely descriptive. It wasn't just, this is an account of what happened. The most important thing, I think, is you don't have to agree with everything that happened. It's about the recommendations going forward. And he always accepted all of those. And that was just completely glossed over, which I thought was a real shame. And what I think this proves to us is, many people on the left, and the HRC has huge problems as an organisation. We've seen that in a bunch of reports recently, which kept, parliamentarians were saying that it has limits right now. The fact that David Goodhart's going to work there as a commissioner, nobody's saying it's a perfect organisation. But why I think the HRC report into Labour it should be welcomed is because it basically takes the heat out of this, and it's going to be a difficult debate because it's about racism. It should be a difficult debate. And it's putting it now onto a procedural/legal footing. And that's where it should be, right? And that's really, really good and really, really positive. Because if you have a debate about emotions and interpretation, you can interpret something, I can interpret you. You've got Jewish supporters of Jeremy Corbyn saying, I don't think he's an anti-Semite. People who are in the Jewish community totally dislike him and say he is, right? So that isn't really going to get us anywhere. And that's why I think that the HSC document was brilliant. And that's why I think it creates a really solid foundation moving forward. But there were, and this is important, Michael, because there were some things in that report, so it didn't find that Labour was institutionally anti-Semitic. It was quite a sober report. It was quite clear. It's certain individuals were responsible for acting unlawfully. And it gave the reasons why, and it talks about failings of a broader complaints process and so on. Things, by the way, which can all be resolved, which is the positive point here. And so, yes, on the one hand, I agree with you. Going forward, people are going to have to accept that there are going to be disagreements. But if they say we have to listen to everything the HRC says, you can't say that on the one hand, and on the other hand say, well, Labour's institutionally anti-Semitic, or Labour is the most, the things you see on Twitter. Labour is the most racist party in Britain. Corbyn's the most racist party in Britain since the days of Mosley. I mean, this is nonsensical. And by the way, it confirms the point that, yes, of course, some people are exaggerating this. That's comically absurd. That isn't to say there isn't a problem. Of course there's a problem. And as we discussed on the day of Corbyn's suspension, the whole farrago undermined the key message, which was, let's all learn something from this and let's create a sort of procedural basis to ensure things improve. Hopefully now that can happen. But again, Starmer's response of suspending Corbyn sort of set that back quite significantly.
I mean, I suppose actually what you've just reminded me of actually is the differences between his original statement and the statement which has been released today, because whilst he hasn't contradicted anything he said previously, I think he has highlighted different things this time around. So before he said, while I do not accept all of its findings, I trust its recommendations will be swiftly implemented. Whereas now he's not now saying, oh, by the way, I now accept all of its findings, but he's not saying it. And sometimes you don't need to say everything. that was always our discussion. When we said originally, everything in his statement was true, but maybe it wasn't the perfect time to say it. You don't always need to say everything that's true.
No, especially when lots of people are feeling vulnerable.
Exactly. And so I do think the second statement says what's needed, doesn't concede, doesn't sort of accept things that are untrue, but it doesn't necessarily have to say everything he's thinking or everything he believes, because you don't have to include that in every statement. Obviously there's various things, we've discussed them on the show, that I don't think are particularly I'm not that confident about in the EHRC report, especially the idea that's quite slippery. Sort of lawyers have been using it on Twitter to argue that anyone who says anti-Semitism was exaggerated in the party is themselves anti-Semitic. The report kind of leaves room for that. There's different interpretations, but I think they should have been much clearer about the fact that obviously to say that is not anti-Semitic. Anyway, some problems with the report, but you don't, anytime I'm interviewed on this question, I wouldn't necessarily say, oh, and by the way, there's all these things I disagree with on the EHRC report. Neither would I say I agree with everything in it, and it's an amazing, perfect document. Anyway, let's move on to some of the reactions. First of all, I want some more details. I want to give you some more details of what happened, how it happened. So who was on this panel? It's a 5-person panel, and we're not supposed to know who was on it, especially not before the decision was made. That's because They don't want the decision to be made based on sort of public pressure. One of the big things that it talked about in the HRC was that clearly people on the NEC were making decisions based on what the backlash would be, what the media response would be, what the PLP response would be. And so one of the, the obvious ways of trying to step back from that is to have these decisions made by people who aren't, it's not publicly publicized. So that wasn't supposed to get out, but it was leaked to Lee Harpin of the Jewish Chronicle. We'll discuss him in a bit more detail in a moment. But for now, let's just focus on the information at hand. So he tweets the exact makeup of Labour NEC panel: Gurinder Singh Josan, Wendy Nichols, Yasmin Dar, Ian Murray, and Alice Perry. And then he comments, not the 3-2 left-wing bias that myself and others predicted, but a lot of pressure on Islington councillor Perry. We don't know how the voting broke down. It's also worth pointing out to you that Ian Murray there is not the Ian Murray MP who's really on the hard right of the party and almost joined Change UK. It's an Ian Murray, a different Ian Murray, who is a representative from the FBU, which is one of the left-wing unions. So of that 5, you had 2 people who were of the left, Yasmin Dar and Ian Murray, 2 people who are of the Labour right. So that was Singh Josan and Nichols, and then 1 person who's considered on the soft left, Alice Perry. We don't know if the voting broke down according to those lines, and Alice Perry was the deciding. It'll be interesting to find out. What is possible, though, is that the legal makeup of the panel wasn't that important, and it was actually this which made the difference. So can we get up graphic 5, Fox? Again, this is from Lee Harpin, who seems to have the best connections to people in Labour Party management at the moment. So he tweets, legal advice was that after earlier statement from Corbyn, Corbyn could challenge any expulsion attempt. So it seems like the legal advice from party lawyers was to say, look, if you expel this guy, if you pass it on to the NCC, so if you pass it on to the higher level, then he's going to have a good legal case, good legal grounds to say that this was an illegal political action, or unlawful as opposed to illegal. So it seems, and that makes sense to me. Obviously, we've argued that it did seem like a completely disproportionate response, and it did seem fairly political. Keir Starmer was consulted on the suspension of Jeremy Corbyn, and it was, they had clearly struggled to determine any rule that he had. In fact, this is very interesting. We still don't know what rule Jeremy Corbyn was supposed to have broken. I should have mentioned that. It is quite ridiculous, right? Thinking about how big a story this has been, how many people are sort of like have been on the edge of their seats, thinking, what is the future of the Labour Party? And this guy's been suspended. No one knows what it was for. Was it for anti-Semitism? Was it for bringing the party into disrepute? Aaron?
Yeah, just to say, I mean, obviously we're live, so these things are all coming in. But Paul Waugh at Huffington Post, who's not always the most reliable source, but this is what he's saying, is claiming that there was a unanimous decision amongst the 5 that Jeremy Corbyn should be readmitted, which is. It's quite remarkable. It may not be true, but it's quite. I mean, his sources are generally from the right of the party. So, in this instance, that wouldn't seem to be a thing to sort of discredit that claim. If anything, it makes it more robust. So that's interesting. And look, if you're the General Secretary, David Evans, you unilaterally, signed this off. You're Keir Starmer. You've been consulted, or you're Keir Starmer's staffers, Jenny Chapman, Chris Ward, whoever, who was like, "This is a really great idea." What a slap in the face. You've got a panel of 5 members of the NEC, like you say, left, right, soft left, and they're all like, this is mad. This can only end badly. What a rebuke to the Labour leadership, and particularly the General Secretary.
Yeah. Although, I mean, what they will argue is that, it was that second statement that made all the difference. So, I mean, if you're David Evans or Keir Starmer, what you'll say is it was the right decision to suspend him, and because he hadn't rolled back on it, and now it's the right decision to let him back in, because he has rolled back on it. Although it seems like he sent that at the time, so I don't know how the timings would work out there, because it seems like Keir Starmer was for a long time saying it was right to suspend him after having received the statement, which is now public, which is the premise for letting him back in. All very confusing. I want to focus on Lee Harpin for 1 second, because I think it is quite interesting that we weren't supposed to know who was on this panel, but it got leaked just before the decision was made. And it got leaked to someone who's incredibly hostile to the Labour left and incredibly hostile to Jeremy Corbyn. And what this looks like to me is that it was a last gasp attempt by someone within the party to try and change the decision made on the panel. So what it looks like to me is, as you say, Aaron, I didn't know that, but it seems like, yeah, it was a unanimous decision. Presumably, given that legal advice, there was an expectation from the people who know, or the people in the know, that this decision was going to go in Corbyn's favour. And someone in the party was like, getting pretty desperate, like, oh, let's reveal all the names to a hostile journalist and hope this creates enough controversy to swing some of their minds, and for them to maybe say, oh, the heat's too much. I don't want to make this decision, so I'm going to pass it on to the NCC, to the higher body who decides disciplinary cases. So that looks like a last gasp attempt to try and swing the outcome. I said I'd go a little bit more into this guy because I don't want you to necessarily take my word for it that he's someone who's hostile to the left. Luckily, I don't have to look very far to find proof for you. This is an article Lee Harpin wrote yesterday about Gemma Bolton, who was elected to the NEC last week on the left slate. So this, again, is something that seems to be from someone within the Labour Party. This person is being investigated for writing this tweet: "If I run the risk of getting suspended for calling Israel an apartheid state, then so be it. Suspend me." Right? There is no way on earth that statement should be investigated. I mean, Israel is an apartheid state. People disagree on the legal tip, but I mean, you've got two people living on the same area and they have different rights to go down different roads and to go in different places because of their ethnicity. That's apartheid. Also, there's no one's written a serious report. The EHRC did not say that should be investigated. But anyway, he's basically trying to smear this person as an anti-Semite for saying something completely reasonable about Palestinian justice. But quite how sort of toxic and hostile this guy is, I think, came later in the article. This was just from yesterday. Again, I'm not digging this. This is not ancient history. He wrote, "An active member of Labour's South East Regional Executive for the last 4 years, social media posts also show Miss Bolton's fondness for sexually explicit humour. One post from 2015 stated, 'I'm torn between wanting to be a high-class Westminster politician or a porn star.'" Now, what possible justification is there for digging up that tweet from a young woman who's just been elected to a senior role in the Labour Party and then printing that in a newspaper, if not to try and smear her in a deeply sexist, pointless way? I mean, how can you possibly justify including that in that widely read article? And so I suppose, the point I just want to make here is it seems like the person who got the most detailed information about what was going on today before anyone else is someone who is so deeply hostile to the Labour left that they are willing to smear young women for tweets they did 5 years ago, joking about whether they'd be politicians or porn stars. I mean, it's grotesque, and it does show you, I think, that there are people still at the top of the party who want to really play dirty against the left and really don't care what means they use, even if it is sort of leaking information which could prejudice the fairness of a case, which is supposed to be the new priority for the Labour Party. Aaron, I want to go to you for this on sort of what you think it tells us that this information, which should not have been public, was leaked before the decision was made and leaked to someone who's deeply hostile to the Labour left.
Well, it's crazy. I mean, it's just absolutely crazy. This isn't just a regular member. This is a newly elected member of the National Executive Committee. It's the sovereign body of the Labour Party. Conference is sovereign, but it's the supreme executive body of the Labour Party. She's a member of it. She's an important person. And before she even knows that she's being investigated, by the way, she isn't being investigated. There's been a complaint that's being looked into. A formal investigation is something quite different. Before she even knows this, it's given to Lee Harpin at the Jewish Chronicle. Just unprofessional. Just, again, I remember Paul Mason saying, "I'm voting for Keir Starmer because he's going to bring some professionalism to the leader of the opposition." Wow. I can't imagine a more unprofessional setup. And by the way, it's not unprofessional because Keir Starmer, although I'm shocked at how legally illiterate he was in the response to the HSC report. It's like he hadn't even read it. I think it's unprofessional because you have warring factions within his leader's office. You have the hard progress and Labour first right. You have some people from the soft left. You have some people that just really want to win, aren't really particularly ideological. That is going to happen now. You have some people working under Starmer who want to defeat the left far more than they want to defeat the Tories. So the idea that you're going to bring about party unity within that broader context, not happening, because their first instinct is going to be briefing things to Lee Harpin rather than trying to establish professional processes. It's a big problem, but this is the person that the Labour membership voted for. And that's the baggage he's now bringing with him.
So we're going to try and get you up. Keir Starmer has tweeted a thread since we went live. which we'll get up for you as soon as we can. And before we do that, because I know we already have this plugged into our system, we'll go to Corbyn's statement himself. Fox, this is graphic 6, if we could get this up. So when the news was revealed, or I suppose Jeremy Corbyn probably found out a little bit before we did, Corbyn tweeted, "I am pleased to have been reinstated in the Labour Party and would like to thank party members, trade unionists and all who have offered solidarity. Our movement must now come together to oppose and defeat this deeply damaging Conservative government." Let's go to, I think we can go to Keir Starmer's tweet. Now, I know that this has been another painful day for the Jewish community and those Labour members who have fought so hard to tackle anti-Semitism. I know the hurt that has been caused and the trauma people have felt. Jeremy Corbyn's statement in response to the EHRC report was wrong and completely distracted from a report that identified unlawful conduct in our tackling of racism within the Labour Party. This should shame us all. I will not allow a focus on one individual to prevent us from doing the vital work of tackling anti-Semitism. When I stood as leader of the Labour Party, I was clear that my first priority would be to root out anti-Semitism. It still is. I know we have a long way to go, but I am absolutely resolute in my determination to make the Labour Party a safe place for Jewish people. I stand by my commitments I made last month to accept the findings and recommendations of the EHRC's report in full. That must mean establishing an independent complaints process as soon as possible in the new year. This is my commitment and my promise to our party, the Jewish community, and the British people. So there's no welcoming back of Jeremy Corbyn, but in a way, I kind of, there's an argument that could be made that this was potentially fairly choreographed. I mean, everyone gets to save face by this, don't they? So Jeremy Corbyn sort of managed to put forward a statement which the party can argue shows that he has rolled back a little bit whilst not contradicting himself. Keir Starmer's there, come out and basically said politically, I think what he said was wrong, but he hasn't commented on him being let back in. Seems like face saving to me. You disagree, Aaron?
Well, yeah, because he's saying in one of those tweets, he's saying, this is about an independent process. This entire episode has shown that you're not interested in independent processes. I want to have an independent process to root out anti-Semitism. The letter sent to Jeremy Corbyn, and like you say, nobody even knew what the actual offence was sent by David Evans. Now, according to the HRC report, David Evans, the General Secretary's office, is a political organ. He shouldn't be doing that. Disputes was completely bypassed. Keir Starmer, he openly said, his team briefed the media that he was consulted about Corbyn's suspension. Right? He shouldn't have been doing that. None of his staff should have had any role in this whatsoever. So you can't, on the one hand, say this episode is now over, which, by the way, my pick as General Secretary started, and which, by the way, he did that within minutes of the HRC reporting. And by the way, in doing so, he defied the central recommendation of the HRC, and then say, we want an independent process. This is like saying, I want to be a vegetarian while I'm finishing a lamb roast. Right? Okay. I mean, that's an interesting take. You're saying as this ridiculous episode culminates, which was clearly subject to political intervention from you, which was clearly not independent, which clearly bypassed any improvements in the party's disciplinary process since 2018-19, noted by the EHRC, may I add, and you're saying you want to do all these things, which are the complete opposite of what you've just done. I don't know where his head is at, right? And it's just, I agree with you. There's a public relations element to this. The whole problem with the anti-Semitism debate within Labour, and the reason why there haven't been problems which have been resolved, is because people keep putting public relations above actually process and solving the problem. And this is a cardinal example of that. You're saying we need an independent process, as you have incredibly politicised, the opposite of independence happening with regards to Corbyn's suspension. And also, he just looks slimy. You can't have the former leader suspended from the party and not even acknowledge them being welcomed back in. He just looks untrustworthy. Now, was that even written by him? I don't know. I have no idea. Like I say, I think there are competing factions within this. But I do think there are people around Keir Starmer from the Labour right who genuinely think he'll win the next election by like 5-10%. All he has to do is destroy the left. They are, effectively a kind of 1980s reenactment society, although Neil Kinnock lost twice. And that raises serious questions. This kind of cosplay Neil Kinnock kind of, reanimation. It makes no sense to me. I think he's lost a lot of credibility, a lot of trust, and he comes across as unlikable, which is strange. You know, we heard him on the Desert Island Discs of the weekend. He came across as quite affable and quite likable. He comes across as the complete opposite here. You know, you had the HRC report, and you're still talking about anti-Semitism a month later because of decisions you made. Poor politics and an absolute absence of leadership. So no, I don't think it's face saving. I think he's really screwed up, and it shows here too.
So I think, I suppose the difference in our interpretations is I don't really care. I mean, I think the problem was with Jeremy Corbyn suspended from the Labour Party. One, a great injustice had been done to someone who's given, you know, so much to the Labour Party and to the left in this country. But also, it would be absolutely impossible to move forward with the left and the centre left existing with the Labour Party in a not completely destructive fashion within the party. And now he's been let back in. I think that all becomes possible. And I really don't care what Keir Starmer tweets about it. I'm not expecting him to say, oh, I really welcome this person getting brought back. To be honest, no party leader does that when someone gets readmitted to the party. Normally when a Tory gets readmitted to the party, they just don't mention it. It's sort of a very press release in the middle of the night, and they hope that no one ever talks about it again.
The Tories have never done it, Michael. No Tory has ever suspended their predecessor from the party as a leader.
Not their predecessor, but when they suspend, they often suspend MPs when there's so much media heat because they said something ridiculously racist, and then when they get that back, they obviously don't mention it.
This was completely unique in the British context. I think saying, well, the Tories would do it. The Tories have never done it before. So no. And I know what you mean. I'd like it to not be important. I'd like that to be the case. But the reality is it's going to be the case because this will carry on as an issue within the Labour Party. For certain people, particularly the Conservative Party, that if they view it purely as, even if they don't, really have I think Labour has a problem. I think it needs to resolve it. But they don't care about that aspect of it. They'll say, well, look, we're perceived as I think the Tory party is an Islamophobic party. And they think, well, we can nullify that by talking about these other weaknesses that Labour has. They're entitled to do that, right? Political parties are entitled to do that. I don't agree with it. I wouldn't do it myself, but they're entitled to do that. And so the idea that this is just going to go away, it is clearly absurd. And this will become a major political Achilles heel for Keir Starmer. Just as it was for Jeremy Corbyn, this attitude that, oh, well, we just need to do this and then everything will be fine. It won't be fine. It won't be fine. And it won't be fine as long as people keep on prioritising public relations above process. It won't be fine.
But, I mean, so what do you think he should have tweeted? Because there is no process to what a leader should tweet. I mean,
he shouldn't have suspended Corbyn in the first place.
Well, we agree with that, but that's a month ago. We're talking about what's happened today.
Right. Yeah, we
agree with what should have happened a month ago. I'm saying, do we care what Keir tweets today when actually we've had a good result?
I just said he comes across as slimy. No, I think he's lost. The political capital Starmer lost was over the last month from Corbyn supporters who then voted for him earlier this year, and there were many, many of them. That's what he's lost. And that set of tweets suggests to me he's not really going to get them back.
Yeah, okay, I'll take that. Let's go to Momentum's statement. First of all, let's go to a couple of super chats. So Dan with 15 quid. After a great result in the NEC elections and the reinstatement of Corbyn, can I encourage comrades who've sadly left to rejoin and take back our party? Absolutely. I mean, I think what the NEC result showed is that actually the left is still incredibly strong in the Labour Party. There were 5 people from the left slate who got elected, only 3 people from the right slate who got elected to Labour's ruling body. So yes, it does seem like there is now the opportunity to build a genuinely powerful base among the left membership in the party. And absolutely, if anyone has left over the past month, they should now rejoin. Tim Allen with a £5. What about those members who've been suspended for questioning Corbyn's expulsion? They also need to be reinstated ASAP. I agree, but I'm not going to talk about that just now because I want to go to Momentum's statement, which covers that issue. So we can now bring up the Momentum statement, which is graphic 7, Fox. So that says a statement from Momentum's co-chairs on Jeremy Corbyn's reinstatement. Momentum has been clear from the start that the suspension of Jeremy Corbyn was an anti-democratic factional attack on the left by parts of the Labour Party leadership. We therefore welcome his reinstatement into the party. This is the right outcome and a testament to the efforts of thousands of Labour members across the country who have stood up to defend Corbyn and the rights of socialists within the party. As the NEC election results show, the Labour Party membership are still firmly committed to transformative socialist policies and member democracy. This is the basis on which party unity must be achieved. Yet in recent days, we have seen a wave of arbitrary suspensions of members simply for attempting to discuss matters vital to the future of the party. They have been punished for discussing Corbyn's suspension at a time when the leader of the Labour Party has used almost every media opportunity to do so. This hypocrisy is fundamentally an attack on the role of members within the Labour Party. These suspensions are unwarranted and should be rescinded immediately. If they are not, there is a serious risk of prolonging a conflict in the Labour Party that should not have been started in the first place. Divided parties do not win elections, and Labour will not get into government if allies of the leadership persist with attacking members. It will be members' ideas, energy and commitment that will drive our party to power. Momentum calls for the immediate reinstatement of all members who were suspended for attempting to discuss the suspension of Jeremy Corbyn. I think that's a great statement from Momentum. I agree with every word of it. As we talked about on Friday's show, there were some really shocking, sort of quite disgraceful decisions by the party to basically suspend a co-secretary and a chair of a Bristol CLP because they had discussed and voted on the suspension of Jeremy Corbyn. The argument was that this politicises the issue. They made the very legitimate and justified point that Keir Starmer has talked about this issue on television. He said he supports the suspension live on television. So why should members not be able to say they oppose the suspension? The answer from the Labour spokesperson on that particular question was, they said, well, Keir Starmer got asked, and of course he's going to ask the question. Now that's very handy, isn't it? Because members don't tend to get asked questions by the BBC or by Sky. They only have a chance to express their opinions through processes within the Labour Party, through voting, because they have power in numbers. So if you say you can only express an opinion within the Labour Party about a suspension if you get asked by a journalist, then really you are prejudicing the processes to favour those with huge platforms like the leader, and to basically disempower and silence anyone who does not have a direct line to journalists. So it was always sort of a disgraceful, dishonest argument. And I really do hope, I mean, all Labour members should now be united behind the demand to bring back members well, whatever members were suspended for discussing this issue. And also it's worth noting, I mean, we don't know exactly how this decision came to be made, but it's not ridiculous to suggest that the fact that there were members who were willing to put forward motions in support of Jeremy Corbyn, even when they had been, told and intimidated into not doing so, was one of the reasons why people at the top of the party felt like, actually, this is going to, the controversy that is growing out of the suspension of Jeremy Corbyn is going to be unsustainable. So there's, I can't say for certain, but there's every reason to believe that it was the protest of party members, which was quite influential, quite significant in this decision to let Jeremy Corbyn back into the Labour Party, which is just another reason that we should all be, united in solidarity with the people who put forward motions to their CLPs, to their local parties to say reinstate Jeremy Corbyn, and were suspended for doing so. Aaron, I want to bring you in on this particular point.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I mean, I think that probably the leader's office was just shocked at the extent of the response. On the night that Jeremy Corbyn was suspended, I think we had 7,000 people watching us live. That just really shows the depth and the groundswell of feeling, even amongst people that liked him. I don't think this is my view, I don't think this happens if the left doesn't win 5 seats in the NEC last week. Personally, I think that really shows, the polling wasn't particularly good for Starmer. His personal approval ratings kind of not huge. You can turn that back, but they just sort of go down a little bit. Members leaving, bad press. And then I think the Biden story about, unifiers win now actually, and Biden really smashed the left. And then I think the culmination of all that is the left winning those 5 seats in the NEC, and the left and the soft left between them getting about, I think, 65% of the overall vote, Open Labour and the Momentum grassroots voice tickets. So I think if that doesn't happen, I think if the Labour right do really well in the NEC elections last week and even more members had left, I think this is very, very different. So I agree. I don't think this was ever inevitable. I think if there hadn't been the kickback from CLPs, if there hadn't been the reporting from ourselves, from Tribune, from journalists right across the left and centre left, and if there hadn't been the results, I think we'd be looking at a very different outcome right now. I think they probably would have just kicked it into the long grass and let him sweat for a few more months. And goodness knows how it would have finished.
We are going to be doing our usual show tomorrow night, where we're going to talk about, the big fallout. I'm sure there'll be many Labour politicians being asked about this tomorrow. It'll be very interesting to see, who from what part of the party says what. But we do have some indication of what some Labour MPs are saying at this particular time. I want to bring up a tweet from Kate McCann from Sky. So she tweets, understand a group of Labour MPs have warned Sir Keir Starmer they may resign the whip if Jeremy Corbyn has the whip reinstated. They're furious, gutted, and feel it undermines work done to rebuild bridges with the Jewish community. Now, I mean, I suppose the first thing to say about this is obviously they're not going to resign the whip. This is the emptiest threat I've ever heard. There are going to be no Labour right MPs with any inclination whatsoever to resign the whip because Jeremy Corbyn has been reinstated. This is just people making a loud noise in the media to try and pressure or to politically interfere, I suppose, to coin a phrase, in the process which has now readmitted Jeremy Corbyn to the party. With him readmitted to the party, I don't see how Keir Starmer could possibly not give him the whip. If you're a Labour member and an MP, you are a Labour MP. So this idea seems like a complete non-starter. And I'm also confused. This is a bluff. This is a bluff, and these people should not be taken seriously. Aaron, your thoughts on how noisy you think Labour MPs might become about this in general? Labour MPs have basically fallen into line behind whatever sort of argument Keir Starmer is making. He seems to be making the argument that, I disagree with what Jeremy Corbyn said in the first place. I'm not going to welcome him back into the party, but also I'm not going to say anything about the decision which has been made. I think if after the formal process has been made to readmit Jeremy Corbyn into the party, if he were now suspended, that would be chaos. That would be Keir Starmer. I mean, as you say, I think his reputation has taken a massive hit from this whole furore. But if they were to now turn around and change their minds again, it would only get worse. So to me, this looks like bluffing, but we will see how noisy people get.
Yeah, I think that's entirely true. I think, I think a journalist as well should be tweeting this. So one contact you have has said this to you after a glass of wine, and on the basis of that, would you as a journalist publish a story in a newspaper or tell it to a camera and broadcast media and say, I'm told that there'll be a number of MPs looking to resign the whip if this happens?
She hasn't said that. She said they have warned Keir Starmer. She hasn't said they will do.
She would.
I mean, because they have warned Keir Starmer. Let me
phrase it.
Threat, right?
She's tweeting something that she would never, I doubt somebody would write down in a newspaper. One source tells me, I just don't think that would be the story. I could be wrong. And you see this repeatedly. And it's understandable, right? If you think about how fluid this experience is, you're a journalist, a big story happens, a good contact gets in touch with you, and you tweet about it. Rather than say, well, okay, I want two sources for this. That's what you should be doing. I want to hear from the other side. Is that really happening? Are these really claims? Who are they? Go and ask them. That's what you would do in a normal story, right? You would gather information. She's just repeating what somebody has told her on WhatsApp and putting it on Twitter. And that's not a criticism of the journalist in question. I think we all do that, right, to an extent.
I mean, she could have been, all I'm saying, she could have been told by two MPs that this was happening. It's very plausible it would have happened.
Maybe,
but I think we get to interpret and say, well, they're obviously not going to do that.
I think I think generally speaking, this isn't to impugn Kate McCann. It's just to say that generally speaking, that does happen a lot with coverage of these stories, especially in real time. They blow up on social media, and it's not good. And we're all learning about how to use new media. It's a whole new way of conducting, discussion and politics. I think it's pretty healthy for journalists just to take a step back and think, how would I report this in broadcast or on print? It wouldn't be like that. Just my view. Separately, there will be lots of noise, and so far people have generally pulled in line with Keir Starmer. The reason being, he's attacked the left. Will they pull in line behind Keir Starmer when he doesn't attack the left? That's the key question for me. And I do think there will be a critical mass of Labour MPs who will brief against him if they have to. I think that will happen. And by the way, they were the same people who briefed against Jeremy Corbyn. Some of them, or many of them, have left now, but that is a perennial feature of Labour politics. Tony Blair had it, Gordon Brown had it, Ed Miliband had it, Jeremy Corbyn had it. Could Keir Starmer have it? I don't know. I think there are many, many characters on the Labour benches who they're not team players, and they are addicted to talking to the press about the internal machinations of the party when they shouldn't be. So I suspect it's on its way. Yes.
Okay, we'll talk way more about this tomorrow, because by then we'll know more about the reactions from the various parts of the party. I'm sure we'll have some video interviews from them having done the morning round tomorrow. There'll be some interesting blowback from all of this. Obviously, there's PMQs as well, so you can expect Boris Johnson to try and take advantage of this as a reason to make jabs at Keir Starmer. And I wonder how he will respond. As I say, if he concedes the point, which is the danger with Keir Starmer, is he says, I concede the point. I basically, yeah, he's terrible. I agree. He should have gone, which then leaves him in a very, obviously he has to stand behind due process. Due process has been done. I disagree with the first thing he said, but clearly they've decided he hasn't, broken the rules. And to be honest, I used to be DPP. It doesn't seem like he has. I mean, he's going to have to use the second statement that Corbyn made as a reason to roll back, because clearly he supported the suspension before. It's going to be quite hard for him to oppose him being readmitted now. Although, again, something to look out for is if people notice that there's a bit of a problem in terms of the chronology of all of this, because Jeremy Corbyn today didn't make a news statement. What he did was publicised a statement which he had already sent to the Labour Party. So if Keir Starmer had backed the suspension after that statement was sent to the Labour Party, and he now changes his mind to say, oh, actually, no, yeah, I think it's fine that he's come back in, that's going to get a little bit awkward for him, which is maybe why you shouldn't opportunistically back kicking out your predecessor because they've said something true. Because when due process is followed and it's obviously decided that no, there's no legal ground for using that statement to kick out this guy, you're going to end up with a bit of egg on your face, which probably is going to happen this week. It will be very, very interesting to see. For now, I have one ask for you, which is we have 1,200 subscribers to go before we hit 100K. If there's anyone watching this show who isn't a subscriber, hit that subscribe button. We want to make that 100K by the end of the week, or by the end of next. But for now, Aaron Bastani, it's been a pleasure being joined by you for this emergency special Tisky Sour. Any final points you want to make before I have you back tomorrow night?
We're going to have a great show tomorrow night. Like Michael has said, there's a lot of goss to go. Who knows what's going to leak what about how this whole thing has just panned out in the last 24 hours. I mean, it's just been breakneck. The whole story broke today. So people have to watch Tisky Sour with Michael and myself tomorrow at 7 p.m. It's going to be fantastic.
Obviously, the final thing I'll say is the reason you're watching this show from my bedroom is obviously that we don't normally do a show on Tuesday night, which means that when there's big news which emerges and it happens quite late in the day, sometimes I have to do it from home. And we want to make this better quality. I know my camera's been wobbling a little bit. I know I'm not speaking on a proper microphone. So we do want to either, there's a couple of options here. Either we go nightly with Tisky Sour, or we get a proper studio in my bedroom. Either of those have their pros and cons for myself, but I am committed to one or both of them. But for now, to make that possible, what we need is your financial support. So if you are already a subscriber to Novara Media, or already a supporter of Novara Media, thank you so much. You make this possible. If not, please do go to novaramedia.com/support and donate the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month, so we can keep going live whenever big events happen, and it be the same top quality which you expect and desire on a technical level. Of course, Aaron's been very top quality tonight. For now, you've been watching Tisky Sour on Novara Media. Good night.